Last week, we talked a lot about different kinds of experiments, field and lab. But what does it really take for your organization to become an experimental organization? What are the skills needed, and what sort of capabilities do you need to develop? Before we answer that question, let's spend a minute trying to ask a more simple question. What is not an experimental organization? Two important points to keep in mind. Simply being innovative doesn't make you an experimental organization. Likewise, simply trying new things from time to time does not make you an experimental organization. In the context of behavioral economics, we're going to use the word experiment in a fairly specific social science kind of way. In other words, we're going to use experiments to mean a controlled trial where you take a treatment, a particular intervention, and test for its effectiveness benchmarked to some controlled condition using the principles that we've talked about all of last week. So, what does it need for you to become an organization that is experimental in nature? The first skill that you need is to have the ability to generate small subsamples of consumers, of citizens, or of agents that you can experiment on. It is important to be able to generate a control condition as well as many treatment conditions that you need to test a particular idea. You can generate these subsamples obviously by allocating your consumers randomly across different groups, but it is also important that those groups are segmentable. What that means is that you need to have the ability to deliver a different intervention to each of those segments separately and effectively. That delivery could happen through a multiple number of ways. You could have a mailing that is different as a function of who's receiving the mailing. Or the product offering could be different as a function of who is receiving that particular product. But it is important to keep in mind that you need to have the ability to generate these samples and therefore to treat those samples differently. The second key indicator is you need to have the ability to deliver simple interventions, low-cost interventions, and quick interventions. You need to have a process in place that decides what exactly the intervention is going to be, and those interventions need to be effective and efficient in order for you to be able to experiment effectively. Third, you need to have a system for rapid feedback and rapid analysis of the data. The moment you generate an experiment and you treat different consumer bases to different products or advertising messages, you need to be able to quickly understand what the effect of that cause was on whatever it is that you're trying to measure, be it choice, be it attitude, or be it a preference for a certain product or variable. The moment you have the ability to collect the quick feedback, you want to also make sure that you can analyze the data effectively and make sure that the analysis is then delivered back to people who might need to design a follow-up experiment quickly and efficiently. There are two organizational skills that are essential to make these things happen. The first, and we've briefly touched on that, is the need for processes. In the next week, we'll be talking a lot about developing processes for how to identify good nudge interventions. Embed those processes well in your organization. Make sure somebody automatically audits consumer decision-making process, and make sure that bottlenecks in that process are identified routinely and are reported back to people who can experiment. The second set of skills that are needed is essentially a culture of empiricism. You need to embrace data. You need to embrace the fact that data tells you what the truth is as opposed to theory. And as we live in a world where our science evolves to being a more mature science, we have to confess that today, behavioral economics doesn't have as much of a theoretical rigor as classical economics does. And that's not because the science is young or that the science is not scientific enough. It is because it is a science about human beings, and by definition, the number of things that affect the behavior of human beings are extremely large. So in order to have a comprehensive theory of decision making, we would need to have a theory that embraces almost everything we see in the world around us. That is going to take time. And until we get there, it is important for us that work in the field to embrace the notion of evidence-based decision-making. Can we use evidence to inform policy? Can we use evidence to inform new products? Can we use evidence to deliver service to customers and to citizens. And as long as we have a culture of evidence-based action, then in fact we will be able to effectively use experiments meaningfully to improve processes, products, and policy.